Today, I'm honored to welcome Reverend Schumacher to Crusade With Me. I've had the opportunity to listen to several of his homilies, and they've consistently challenged and encouraged me in my own walk with Christ. He also spent nearly a decade serving in the missions in Africa alongside his family, so I know he has a wealth of experience and wisdom to share. So, Pastor, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today, and it is a real privilege to have you on the program. Okay. How are you, Pastor?
I'm doing well today. Beautiful day outside, beautiful day inside.
It is. And we've been discussing for a little bit of time, about an hour and a half prior to sitting down and actually getting to work.
That's true. That's okay. That's all part of it.
It is.
Yep.
It is. It's a lot of just good conversation. And you were telling a little bit of your history to Kathy and I. And what I didn't hear in your history was that you are a German. I mean, you're an American. You're an American. Your ancestry-wise, you're German.
Correct.
But you are Roman Catholic Germans, correct?
Well, yes, partly. My Schumacher ancestors came over from Germany as Catholics.
Okay.
And as they settled in Missouri, the state of Missouri, where I'm from, they settled, and the family settled. They got busy with farming. They got busy with the limestone mining and block laying and whatnot. And there was no Catholic church. They were all Lutheran churches.
Okay.
And because they were Lutheran churches, that's where they went.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I didn't grow up Lutheran, right? I mean, we had that conversation.
Yeah.
And so for me, I remember the first time I went to a Lutheran church twice before Kathy came with. And the third time I went, I took Kathy. I said, "No, now you got to come to church with me." So she came. And I remember getting in our car leaving, and I'm trying to pull out onto the highway to leave the church building parking lot. And I look this way to look for traffic, and I catch her staring at me. And I'm like, "What?" And she says, "You want to become Catholic?" is what she said after leaving the worship service.
Right.
From our perspective at that time, that was very Catholic-esque.
Yep.
And then I did tell you the story about I think the world of my boss. He's a young man, younger than I significantly, but he's a devout Roman Catholic, and he has taught me so much about the things that least to be respectful of about the Roman Catholicism, and I've been trying to educate him about Lutheranism, and it's interesting what people don't know. I'll be candid, and so he's shocked when he found out that, "Oh, you believe in the real presence?" He said, "I thought Protestants," and I can't stand that term, but because
it has its place, but not in Lutheranism.
Well, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
But in a Roman Catholic's mind, if it's not Roman Catholic, then it's Protestant.
Yep.
So, when I was joking, really, with him and his boss, who's the president of the company and who's also a devout Catholic, and I was questioned about me being Catholic, and I says, "Yes, I belong to the true Catholic Church." I thought that was a terrible joke and decision at that time. I thought, "Oh, this guy could terminate me in a minute," and he did not look happy with my answer when he found out that I was truly Lutheran. So, but let me ask you, how did you get to become a pastor? What did that look like? How did that calling happen to you? That's a way to say.
That's a good way to put it. And it happened when I was about 6 or 7 years old. I grew up in a small town in Missouri, Concordia, Missouri, a very German Lutheran community. In fact, our church membership was actually larger than the town's population because the rural area and all the farmers. And so we had a large Lutheran church, St. Paul's Lutheran Church, and St. Paul's Lutheran Grade School. to which I attended the grade school. And I was in, I think it was first grade. And we happened to have a missionary come one Sunday for a visit. And instead of Sunday school, we had his presentation. And being in first grade, we got to sit in the front row. And he started talking about the people of Africa and how their culture, meaning how they live and how they do things and even how they speak, is different. And he also talked about the great need to tell them about Jesus. He also had artifacts with him, and told us how they use tools or cooking materials, this or that. And it just stuck in my mind and in my heart. And so, being in a small town, we weren't that far. We were probably maybe 3 blocks away from the church. So after Sunday school and after church, the late service we went to, I remember going home, and my mother met us at the door. And as I went in the back door, I said, "Mom, I know what I want to be when I grow up." And she said, "And what's that?" And I said, "I want to be a pastor and a missionary to Africa." She smiled at me, let me in the door, and she said, "Well, that's fine." Well, it made her parents very happy because from her side of the family, there were several pastors already, different generations of pastors. And so one of her 4 sons, there were 8 kids in my family, 4 boys, 4 girls. One of her sons wanted to be a pastor. That was just great.
Sure.
That was great. You can imagine a mother's joy.
Exactly.
And she grew up in the church, and her family was very diligent about worship. And so that kind of began. And so being in a parochial school, going through confirmation classes, and then going as I was in 8th grade, confirmed, then my pastor at that time talked to me about becoming a pastor. I said,
in 8th grade?
In 8th grade.
Okay.
And I said, well, that's been in the back of my mind since I was in first grade. And so we had, my home congregation actually started, I think it was back in 1883. They started what was then a preparatory school for the ministry. And it was called St. Paul's College. And so then through time, the name changed to St. Paul's College and College High. And so it was a 4-year high school, a 2-year junior college.
Okay.
And it was actually a prep school for the ministry. So you would end up going to St. Paul's. In the early days, you would go there for 6 years. And then you would go on to the seminary for 4 years. They didn't have the senior colleges back in those days. And I'm talking, the early 40s, 30s,
Sure,
like that.
Sure.
But then when, colleges grew and academics developed, programs grew in all these universities and colleges, and then it also, at our seminaries, became a 4-year institution. And to get in, you needed to have an undergrad degree.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but St. Paul's never changed. And until after I left, thank goodness. But anyway, so I went to St. Paul's then, based upon my pastor's invitation and also his assistance. He was able to find a scholarship to help me go there. Now, granted, I was only what they called a day student. I didn't board there because I only lived a block away.
Sure. Okay.
So, I stayed at home, but I went to the school there. And it was kind of, you're there to study to either be a pastor or a teacher. Well, at that time, and this was in the late 60s, early 70s, and so times were changing.
Sure.
And you had more and more people coming there just for general education. And so I took the track of pre-ministry. So I took 2 years of German, and I took my religion classes. And then, just went on with the idea that I was going to be a pastor. Well, I became, in my 3rd year there, in my junior year of high school, they started the academic program where you could take college courses for both high school and college credit.
Yeah.
And I thought, hey, this is a good way to get out of school quick. And so I started, took some classes in my junior year and my senior year, And I was just short one class of having my first year of college done by the time I graduated from high school. And so, I thought, this is great. And I met my wife at that time. We had been dating. And I got thinking, well, she was going to go on to Seward, Nebraska, to become a teacher and a Lutheran school teacher. And I, my plan was to go to the senior college, to go to the seminary. And I got thinking, do I really want to go to school that long?
I get it.
After I'm done, I really only have 3 years of college left, but then to go on 4 more years. And I had a math professor who came to me after class one day. It was geometry class, and he said, I want to talk to you, Mr. Schumacher. I said, oh, yes, sir. And he says, do you have any plans for your future after you leave this institution? I said, well, not for certain yet. He said, well, I think you ought to do something in math. Okay, I'll think about it. To which I thought, what would I do in math? I don't know if I want to be a teacher I never thought about that. But I did like to build things. I did like to think about, construction.
Sure.
And my grandfather taught me a few things. My father taught me some things. I at an early age, I was taught how to work with the compressors, and air conditioning and whatnot. And so I kind of enjoyed that.
Mm-hmm. Mechanical.
Yeah.
Mechanical.
So I got to thinking, well, maybe I'll just go to Central Missouri State and do something there for 3 years and not go to the Sem. So, and then, my girlfriend, what do we do? And, well, so I did. I went to Central Missouri State University and majored in industrial design technology.
Okay.
And, wow, what a fascinating education. Talk about hands-on, everything.
Really? Okay.
Automotive, machine design, CAD/CAM systems were just barely coming in at that time. I mean, they were still kind of futuristic,
Sure.
but they were starting.
Yeah.
And, we still had to take, the Fortran 4, the COBOL computer languages for computer programming, CNC machines. And, boy, all of this was so fascinating to me.
Sure.
And I even loved metals class, I made my own toolbox, made a funnel,
Yeah.
I mean, wow, what's better than this,
I made a ball peen hammer. It's still in my toolbox out there with a gnarled handle. I know.
So needless to say, I went that track. My wife and I got married. I worked for an engineer.
What year was that?
When we got married?
Yeah.
Well, it was 50 years ago this summer.
Awesome.
August 7th of 1976. And I say that, whoops, because my wife's birthday is the 11th. Sometimes I get them confused.
That is awesome. And we're not there yet. Right now, you're in August, you'll be celebrating your 50th, so I hope there's a big shindig going on.
Well, yeah, there kind of is. We have 3 children, 10 grandchildren. 2 of our children live in Nevada with 6 of our grandkids, and the other child lives in Minnesota with 4 of our grandkids, and they're all coming to our house, in fact, next week.
Excellent.
And they're going to spend a week with us. My wife says, I want everybody to come home. So
right.
we're going to celebrate a little early.
It's okay.
Mainly because our kids are teachers.
Correct,
they have responsibilities.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
At the end of September, Kathy and I will be celebrating our 40th. So,
Oh.
yes. So I am intrigued because, we share something in common, and that is, sadly, we are in a small club. They're the people celebrating 30-plus years of marriage to the same person. That group continues to shrink.
Yeah.
And that's sad, very sad in my mind. And I feel like it's an honor to be part of a club about marriage.
Yep.
And that test of time, right?
Oh, absolutely.
is a testament
Yes.
in my mind.
You're absolutely right. And, it was through that marriage, we got married. We went to Des Moines, Iowa, where Cindy was called from Seward in order to start a preschool at a Lutheran church.
Okay.
And so we went to Hope Lutheran Church in Northeast Des Moines, and she started up the preschool there. And I mean, she had, I think one year she had like 65 kids.
Wow.
In different classes, but,
Right.
all these different kids. Well, we were in the church, we met a lot of, people our age, and we connected with them, through interest and things like that in the church. We developed kind of a young men's group. It wasn't organized or anything, but we just get together. We'd go to church. We had kind of a half court basketball.
Sure.
And in the wintertime, we'd go do that. In the summertime, we'd be outside playing softball, volleyball, and in the fall, we'd even, play touch, a little rougher touch football. Yeah. And, but it was always interesting because, our friend group, if you will, just grew and grew and grew. And how it grew was kind of through that preschool. And so...
because the children drew you together.
Yes, kind of, in kind of a roundabout way. I had been active in the church. I actually was the choir director, and I was asked to serve on the board of evangelism. And our evangelism group then, grew, and then I was asked to be the chairman one year, fine. And so what I started doing was taking the names from our preschool, from my wife, who, to visit all the families in the preschool, to make a church visit on all the families.
Yeah.
Unbelievable how many were not members.
Sure, absolutely.
And how many people were open to coming to church. They loved the preschool. They loved the teacher. I said, well, so do I. But
of course. You're biased, though.
Right. And the church grew, and we kept growing. And so
you didn't study marketing and any of your because I'm going to be honest with you. I've done a lot of things in my life, in my career, to earn a living or attempt to earn a living. And when we were early married, before I started in the mills, I got hooked up. Honestly, it was a guy through church who I'm curious. We've lost contact. This is close to 40 years ago. So I sold children's books and encyclopedias. Okay.
Yeah.
And I made a lot of money doing that initially.
Right.
But do you know what they did? They bought records from hospitals, and this was nationwide. They would buy records from hospitals and hold on to those records for new births, would hold on to those records for a couple of years. Then they would sell them to our company, and then we would make contact. And I would do none of this, right? This was all done corporately behind the scenes. And this is how long ago it was when you could still have film for a camera. Okay.
Yeah.
So you could win a year's worth of Kodak film for your camera, which is brilliant for a new family. Here's the film for your camera to take pictures of your baby. Or a 4-day trip to Disney World, right? That was one of the two things you could, by listening to the spiel, which would be me coming into your house, and I actually made a lot of money. That's not terribly different than what you were doing through the preschool of...
Kind of. There is this... I didn't make a lot of money.
Well, no. I'm just talking about the how you got that connection.
Right.
How you... Yeah.
The connection. You through the preschool, taking the names, going and visiting. And at that time, we're looking at in mid to late 70s. Mm-hmm. And early 80s. And at that time, you could go knock on somebody's door and feel safe.
Yes.
Right. Well, every now and then we had a couple of dogs, that were problems. Sure. But, for the most part, you could go to somebody's door and knock on it. They'd come to the door and answer. And when we told them who we were, that we were from, Hope Lutheran Church and Hope Lutheran Preschool, mm-hmm. Could we come in for a visit and just talk? And, well, sure.
Really? A cold knock?
Cold knocks.
I mean, wow.
These were all cold knocks.
So you're telling me in the late 70s, early 80s, Lutherans were doing door knocking campaigns?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
That is absolutely shocking. And the only reason I say that is because I shared a little bit about our past and the background that we came through with the Churches of Christ. And Kathy and I dated all during her high school career. And some of our dates, including door knocking. All right.
Yeah.
We did a lot of that. So when we talked about Pastor Rabel, he's a lifelong pastor of mine.
Right.
He's now moved to Texas as a congregation in Texas. We had an idea. I don't want to get into all that. I'll tell you later. But part of that idea was we were going to do a door knocking campaign to try to get people to come to church because we put together a prayer path. All right, which would mean it's quasi-Romanesque, where it's almost like the 7 stations of the cross, but it's not. It was to eliminate noise from your life, and then we had a little station set up, and it was a TV with just snow, right? So meditate and pray.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And we went through the sanctuary with these different, and then you knelt at the rail and you just thought about, this is where we receive grace and forgiveness at the, through the sacrament of the altar. And so we were door knocking to try to get people to come through this prayer path that we would open up to the public. And they looked at us like we were crazy. So I was under the impression the Lutherans had never done door knocking before, but God bless them. Pastor Rabel did. We had Deaconess Eck. She did. She's still there. Wonderful, wonderful woman. And a few others. And we did door knocking campaigns in this small town, and each one of us picked out a different subdivision to go. But it's interesting to me that because this was like their first.
Yeah.
And this was in the early 2000s or mid 2000s.
Okay.
This was not
different era, different time.
Yes, it is. You're right.
Different expectations,
Correct.
And different, there were a lot of things happened differently as far as receiving people at your door.
Correct.
And even today,
One thing we did was, and this was just leading up to, we would do the prayer path like the weekend before Palm Sunday.
Oh.
All right. Then you had Palm Sunday. Then you had Holy Week.
Yep.
And we started a tradition. They are still, to my knowledge, they're still doing there at that congregation, is they have a prayer, continuous prayer from Friday evening till Sunday morning. There is somebody at the building praying over prayer requests. And the way we did that was we set up card tables, quite honestly, at local businesses, and we stood out there and asked people to fill out a card to fill out a prayer request.
Yeah.
And then we took that back to the building, and then people came in shifts around the clock and prayed over these prayer requests, which was great because now I could produce a parochial report saying this many prayers were prayed over this many hours for this many different people, and it was participated by this many people.
Right.
It was, and to my knowledge, they're still doing that today. I know they were at least 2 years ago. They were still doing that, and we're going back almost 20 years. I found it. We couldn't do that by the door knocking. We tried, and just people refused to come to the door.
Yeah.
But it was much more receptive if we were just standing there saying, would you mind, if you're interested, fill out this card,
right,
put it in that box. Right. We wouldn't look at it, and we got a lot of them. We had hundreds and hundreds of them.
Oh, I bet.
That was interesting.
Yeah. Well, just going on here with that process there, it was during that time at Hope in Des Moines that, as we had made these visits on these preschool members and their families, that we also called on, other individuals. And so we had, interestingly, we had a lady in the congregation, a younger lady about our age, and she had 2 daughters. And they were coming to the Sunday school, vacation Bible school, and the mother was coming. And I asked her one day, I said, your husband, what about your husband? Oh, no.
No, right.
He doesn't want to come to church. I said, well, why not? Well, he was brought up different in a different denomination, and he wasn't happy because of mystery, yada, yada, yada.
Right.
Long and the short of it is, I finally said, would you mind if we came to visit? Just come talk.
Right.
And, well, I think it would be okay. And so I said, well, we'll be there Monday night. And so another gentleman and I went and called on him. And we went and sat down in his house, and we visited with him. We started talking and talked about church. We talked about belief and faith. And we talked about what God does for us.
Mm-hmm.
And all of his love and his grace, comes to us through Christ, forgives our sins, gives us the assurance of everlasting life. And he sat there and he looked at us. And I did not know what that look meant. And my first question was, is this a look that's get out of my house
Right. Yeah.
while you're still walking? Or, So anyway, so we visited and everything was fine. Like I said, he didn't say much. His wife, spoke up, and this and that. And
Sure.
I think she felt a little
Uncomfortable.
awkward and
Yeah.
uncomfortable. And so, we knew that, it's time to leave. So we left. And we had another lady that was even a little younger. They had no children. And so we called on her. And again, or no, we didn't call on her. We talked with her at church and asked about her husband. Well, he's a radio announcer. And he works a lot of Sundays. I said, oh. I said, well, sometime I'd like to come over and just meet him.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be possible? Well, sure. Yeah. So again, another member of the evangelism team and I, we went and called on a Monday night. And we had a wonderful conversation. And again, he had grown up in the old American Lutheran Church. And so he had some skepticisms about things. But it was a very interesting visit that we had.
So I'm going to stop you right there. American Lutheran Church, is that what today? That's not LCMS.
No, ALC is what it was referred to as the American Lutheran Church. And years ago, the LCMS and the ALC were in altar and pulpit fellowship.
Okay.
However, that changed, and the ALC, this would have been back in the late 70s, in the early 80s, and the ALC joined with the ELC, the Evangelical Lutheran Church, and became what is known today as the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America.
Okay.
And so we talked and visited, yada, yada, and went and left. Well, that gentleman, his first name, Mike, ended up coming to church with his wife. And he came, and he started coming to Bible class, and he started asking questions, brought his Bible, and was doing wonderful, They kind of became part of our friend group, and it was like he had always been there, always been part of it. Came up to me and he says, you guys coming to visit me. That's what I needed. It's kind of like that was the push, out of the chair, off of the cliff, whatever you want to say that I needed.
Right.
And I said, it's not us. It's what God does through us.
Correct. Right.
And he said, well, would it be okay if I joined your group? I said, sure. Well, the first gentleman I told you about, we hadn't visited yet because it was Mike and I who went to visit.
Him?
Yes.
Okay.
And his first name, Lauren. Lauren had more of a, Baptist background.
Sure.
And not a very good church life and child life. And life had been difficult for him.
Mm-hmm.
And so, interestingly, as Mike and I, had called on Lauren, and a few weeks after that, made several other visits. We're sitting in the parking lot after we visit, and we talk about the visits, make some notes, and we have a closing prayer. Mike would get out, get in his car, and then he would go home. Before he did that, he said, I got to tell you something, Steve. I decided I want to go to the seminary and become a pastor. Oh, I said, great. That's wonderful. And so he did. He came to Concordia Theological Seminary here in Fort Wayne and became a pastor. And so that happened. And then all of a sudden, Lauren started coming to church. Came and he said, that's exactly what I needed. I needed to get pushed off of that bench, off of that cliff. And it was that call that you guys made that got me coming to church. I told him, I said, Lauren, it's not what we do, it's what God does through us. So Lauren says, can I join your group? I'd like to start visiting people and just talk to them and listen to them and help them get off that bench. I said, sure. So he joined the evangelism group, and so Lauren and I made calls, and I'm not talking about just days or weeks. I'm talking about several years.
Yes, yeah.
And with Mike too, and through the years, then this all took place, and all of a sudden, after Mike had left, and it was probably only 6 months after he had left for the seminary, Lauren came and said, I think I want to head down that path to become a pastor. He had a longer pathway to go,
Sure.
not being Lutheran. And not only that, but Lauren didn't even have a college education.
Okay. Yeah.
And so Lauren went, finished. He didn't even graduate from high school. So he got his GED. He went to one of our Concordia universities, got his college degree, went to the seminary, and at the age of 45, graduated and became a pastor and served faithfully for another 25 years.
This is an amazing story, actually.
So, lo and behold, all of this leads up to your first question. What got me into the ministry? Finally, where I worked in Des Moines, I had an engineering firm. We had people that we worked with, and one of the guys in my department, he and I were friends. We traveled to work because we didn't live that far apart. We traveled back and forth together, and we started talking about church. Come to find out, he was a Lutheran, but didn't go to church. And so Bruce then started coming to church, and he joined our church and his wife, and they got active again. And but then the hard times hit in the early '80s with the. We had dirty coal all of a sudden. The company I worked for, our main clientele were power plants, power, steam, electrical generation plants using coal. And that became dirty all of a sudden. So now all of a sudden we had to start cutting back on personnel. And as a department chair, I had to start letting people go, which was the hardest thing I've ever done. It's not that they weren't capable of the work. They were. It was just the work wasn't there to do.
Right.
And so I really struggled with that. But I did what I was expected. We trimmed down. I went home and I told my wife, I can't do this. And she said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I think I'm going to look into going to the seminary. And she wasn't in favor of it. And she said, well, we just bought this house. We're extended ourselves. And now the economy is what it is. Are you sure? And I said, well, if it's the Lord's will, it'll all work out.
Right.
So needless to say, we called a realtor who happened to be a former preschool parent of hers. And he came over and he looked at our house and walked in and he said, you know what? I'll be back, next week. And I said, okay. Came back next week and he sat down at our table with us and he told us all the different possibilities. He said, it's a hard time to try to sell a house right now. Yeah, we know. And interest rates were high. And he goes through all these different options. And then he says, and none of them look good. And then he finally says, I do have one more possibility. I leaned over to my wife and I whispered, I bet he wants to buy it. She looked at me like, yeah, right. And he said, well, a friend of mine, we buy homes. And we'd like to buy your home. Whoa. We never had a for sale sign up in our yard. We had an asking price. He gave it to us. Wow. This went quick. And my wife finally said, well, maybe this is what. So this is what,
right.
So then we found ourselves going to the seminary.
In Fort Wayne.
In Fort Wayne.
That's excellent. That's
Yep.
excellent.
And Mike was just finishing up his 4-year degree here, and Lauren was in his 3rd year.
That is something.
And so it was
you were
interesting. All three of
together.
us were here at the same time.
Now, are you still in contact with Mike or Lauren?
I'm still in contact with Mike. Lauren has passed away.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That is amazing.
Yeah.
So, something that you were talking about there, and you said that on 2 different occasions that both those gentlemen had used a term, and that's giving me encouragement, because that's a little bit about what I want Crusade With Me to be about. Not that I want Crusade With Me to be only for men,
Mm-hmm.
but I hope that Crusade With Me can be encouraging to men. I think a couple of them made reference to being that push off the cliff, or that push to take the next step, what have you. And I hope that can just be the seed that plants in the head, that then someone else can come along and help them physically with that little bit of a shove, you know. And that's very, very. So where in all of this, because I didn't know this till you arrived this morning, where in all of this did the whole sign language part start?
It did actually start in part of that, but not as a learning process, but as a fear process. Our church in Des Moines was right next door. We had maybe 20 feet between our driveway going to the back parking lot and the driveway going to a back parking lot of a Lutheran Church for the deaf. I had a classmate in prep school who had gone into the ministry and gone into deaf ministry. I, visited with him. He, back and forth when he was learning all this and doing this. I said, "Wow, that's just fascinating. I don't get it." And so then my wife and I would sit in the preschool room and in the kitchen, looking into the parking lot on a Sunday afternoon, getting things ready, for her preschool during the week. And the deaf are coming out of church, and they're just going all over the place with their hands and their facial gestures, bodies, and all of this. And we're like, how do they really understand what they're saying?
Mm-hmm.
And we just thought, this is unbelievable. Just unbelievable that this happens. What a way to communicate. So I went to the seminary, and I enjoyed the languages, took my Greek, took my Hebrew, had my German. And so, interestingly, one of my professors, I met him one time as I was coming into the building. He was coming from his office, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and he grabbed me by the shirt collar, and he said, "Schumacher, you're taking the deaf ministry program next year." And I said, "With all due respect, sir, I've seen that, and there's no way I can do that." And he says, "You're taking the program next year." How do I get out of this? So I said, "Well, I'll pray about it." He let go of my shirt collar. He turned, made a 90-degree turn to go in front of me and walk down the hallway, put his hand in the air, and he waved, and he said, "See you in the fall." And I thought, oh, man, what did I walk into today? So, to keep my word, I went and I signed up for the deaf ministry program. 25 guys, including myself. We took the first course. It was a 3-course program all year long. And signed up, took it. We started learning basic sign language. I thought, hey, this isn't bad. I'm a picture-orientated person.
Sure.
And, working in engineering and construction, I thought, this kind of just flows right into it. This is a piece of cake. And so then we took the first term, and then the second term came, and, there were only 15 guys that stayed in the class. We lost 10 because it was difficult for them or whatever, and so I took that, and then the third term, we got into religious signing and translations. And there were only 5 of us in that class. So we would take the Hebrew, we'd take the Greek, we'd take the German and the Latin, and we'd work with translating Bible verses into the sign language. We took the catechism and started working with catechetical studies, developing them to teach deaf children, to teach deaf adults. And so we were doing all of this and hymnody, translating hymns.
Okay.
And so then, after the end of the year, then I was ready to go out on vicarage, and I was sent on a vicarage down in Florida to two congregations on the same property, but in separate buildings. We had a hearing church, and we had a deaf church across the property, across the parking lot. And so when I first got there, my vicarage supervisor, we called him at that time, he was my bishop, and Bishop Wagenack, said, he always called me Vic, short for vicar, and he says, Vic, when you go over to the deaf church, make sure you shut the door in the parking lot. What? Oh, didn't understand that. So I went over to the deaf church to lead worship, and after worship, now I understood. The cultural door. You go from a hearing world into a deaf world. And you walk through a door. Walk from one room to another room. You walk from a hearing world into a deaf world where communication is different. So anyway, that's what got me into it. And then I came back for my fourth year, and then was sent out to a congregation, two congregations that met in the same church facility at the same time. So I had to sign and voice, and both congregations expected correct grammar in their language. So I had to speak in English and sign in American Sign Language at the same time. The whole worship service, the sermon, the liturgy, the hymnody, and then after that, then Bible class.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Because we talked about this just a little bit, because I know nothing about sign language, even though Kathy and I joke and not joke for years that I need to learn it. She knows how to do the alphabet in, I think it's American Sign Language, whatever it is. I know nothing. I know this is Jesus with somebody. This is Jesus. But other than that, I don't. That's from a song.
Right.
That when you sign, you don't use, it's almost like texting. You don't necessarily always use every word that you would when we speak.
Correct.
So when you said that they wanted correct full grammar signing, does that mean you were doing the long version?
No.
Oh, but the verbally.
The long version.
Okay. So now you're saying one thing, but signing something
You're
a little bit
something
different.
Yep.
Okay, that's kind of like
you speak
singing and playing
languages.
piano. That's like singing and playing piano.
Kind of, but it's speaking in two languages at once.
Wow. Yeah. And I, this is something, because I'm goofy. I admit that. And you've extensively taught sign language and through congregations, through the seminary, through you worked for the LCMS, doing sign language training. And it dawned on me, and I asked you, how do you teach people who hear, or are you teaching sign language to people who don't hear? And you said yes. I'm like, okay. So can you go into that a little bit more?
Well, I can, yes. With hearing people, hearing people always want to know, well, I'd like to learn this,
Right. Right.
And so through different, whether it was through a congregation where I served or whether it was through a junior college that had contacted me and asked me to teach the classes, for them in a community for adult ed, or whether it was here at the seminary, where I taught the deaf ministry program. We have hearing people coming. The deaf people are not coming in order to learn sign language, but in the parishes that I served, in the deaf congregations, they're coming to learn the religious signs.
Oh, okay.
They
Okay.
have
Yeah,
some
yeah.
signs, religious signs, but like in the Lutheran Church, we have doctrines of the church.
Sure.
We talk about the office of the keys.
Right.
In the hearing world, what is the office of the keys? Is that a room full of keys?
Right, yeah.
And so, but the deaf, that's a picture that they get, an office of the keys. That's a room full of keys.
Right.
A deaf will get that picture because their language many times is made off of pictures or miming,
Right.
which
Okay.
is
Miming,
kind of
that's
like
a
a
great-
video.
Right.
And so anyway, with that, then we teach them, the church language, the language of the church.
Okay. And that's where you get into it. So you took, did I hear you correctly telling me you took the Book of Concord and developed a sign language course for that?
Not for the whole book.
Okay.
For portions of it.
Okay.
Yeah, it was portions of it that what we did as students at the seminary, but then also, through the years in the ministry. And our biggest, work was with the catechism,
Okay.
which is included in the Book of Concord. And so we would take the catechism, and why we had to do it differently sometimes was because of the culture. In America, we would use one form. But then when I taught deaf people catechetics in Africa, the culture is different, and even their sign language is different. And see, that's a misconception. People think that, well, I know the ABCs, so I can go around the world and I can
Yeah.
do ABCs. No. There's actually 250 different sign languages around the world. Now, there is actually one that is called the universal sign language. However, not a lot of deaf people use it. Not a lot of deaf people use it. You'll find some, like in Europe, in different countries in Europe, that they know it and they will use it, but not many American deaf know it. African deaf definitely don't know it.
So you've served in Africa for nearly a decade, right?
Yes.
And you were there. Part of your missionary journey there was for the deaf.
Yes.
How, there's deaf people everywhere, right? I mean, globally.
Yes.
I'll be candid with you. This is how self-centered I am. I never thought about that. I never thought about, and I remember as growing up, we went to a congregation that had a couple of deaf members, and the pastor, we didn't call them pastors, we called them ministers. Okay. He did know sign language. And if he didn't do sign language, one of the ladies stood up front and sign language for her husband, basically. I've never thought about that but to hear you talk about how far back in your recollection do you think the LCMS had designated deaf congregation? I didn't realize that was a thing at all.
Yeah. This goes back quite a ways.
Really?
Yes, it does. It goes back quite a ways, and I wish off the top of my mind, I don't have the date.
No, I would, but 10 years, or 50 years, 100 years?
We're talking probably closer to 100 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And in fact,
I mean, that is awesome. Just because I feel embarrassed that I've not thought about that. But that's actually freaking awesome. I mean,
yeah.
Oh, 400.
Yeah, our church has gone back, quite a ways, doing mission work for the deaf. And a lot of it, kind of stemmed out of orphanages, where there were deaf children in orphanages, no one to minister to them. Then we found that these large pockets in certain parts of the country where there were more concentration of deaf people, and the majority of them centered around the manufacturing areas and early manufacturing. So, I mean, you can imagine, the Ohio River Valley area,
Sure.
and then up in, even in the Philadelphia,
Pittsburgh.
Philadelphia, but I'm thinking like Buffalo, New York,
Okay,
in
right.
these areas and then in Pittsburgh, steel manufacturing, and throughout America, because the deaf were good with their hands. And when I was on vicarage, I vicared down in Clearwater, Florida, and we had an air conditioning company down there. And if there was a job opening for a laborer, and they would sit at these individual units that had, their desk, their work center, and then they had dividers between them and the next one. And many times that was to keep your part straight.
Mm-hmm.
But this company would love to hire deaf people over hearing people, because if the deaf individual is looking straight ahead, working, they're not paying any attention to anybody else.
Right, and the noise or what have you.
Yeah. Or somebody sitting next to them talking to them, mixing them up, So
Correct.
So the deaf people down there did a lot of manufacturing, putting thermostats together, if you will, and a lot of intricate parts, because they would focus on their job.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
I got to talk to HR. We're always in need of welders.
Yeah.
Hey, can you hire me some deaf welders? It's like we don't make it hard enough on HR to like hire them. But now I want you to go hire deaf welders.
Right. Yeah.
They will look at me cross-eyed 9 days to Sunday. But anyway, something that is amazing, and that makes perfect sense to me. And like I said, so when you went to Africa, that was through, or you were going to a seminary there, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I was called to go serve at our partner seminary, our missionary partner seminary. At that time, it was just the Ghana seminary.
Okay.
It didn't even have a name yet. It was kind of new. It had been in existence, not really organized. It was a very loose organization. And but then they had built the building, and the LCMS helped to build this facility out in what they called the bush. And here in this facility, it was one building, and it was kind of in a square, and around the outside walls were the dormitories, and then classrooms. It was four. They would have called it 4 floors, and but 3 of them were only used for dormitories, classrooms, a library, and then we had these little rooms that they would say, "This is your office," but you couldn't even get a desk in there. It was that small. And but anyway, and the center was open, and so we used that as the gathering area, if you will. We started a church there for the village, Shepherd of the Valley Lutheran Church. And it also gave our students experience of leading worship and preaching in worship,
Sure.
In a congregation, in a mission, site.
Sure.
And so I was called there to teach theology courses, and I was also called as the provost or the academic dean to establish the academics, the curriculum. How is this program going to work?
Wow.
And so initially I was called to do that. And with that was to help the church body out, because they had for many years a mission to a village that was about, maybe 4 kilometers away from the seminary in the hills. And many, many years ago, it was predominantly a deaf village. So much that they had their own sign language, not completely documented. And so the way you learned the language was by association. And
So it's Ghana Sign Language.
No, this
No.
was the village.
Oh, the village.
Adamorobe. Adamarobe was the name of the village.
Okay.
It was the Adamarobe language. And there was another village similar to this up in northern Ghana. We were in southern Ghana, but another one was up in northern Ghana. And so that was one language. Now, I was never proficient at that language because it's so difficult to learn, because it's so different than American Sign Language or Ghana Sign Language. And so what I would have is I had a member who was an elder of the congregation, and he spoke both Adamarobe, obviously, but he also knew Ghanaian Sign Language. And so if there was something that I didn't understand, I would, he would come in the conversation, to help clear it up.
Right.
And so we did that. Now, an interesting situation took place where the deaf people there are so poor that when an individual dies, they have to be buried within a short order of time, no more than 12 hours, simply because they do not embalm
or anything.
And they can't afford it. And so, it is literally a rough sawn box that the body is put in, the corpse is put in, and into the ground it goes quickly. And so I got called on a Saturday evening and, by a hearing person that was communicating with the deaf people that one of our deaf members had died. And we were trying to make arrangements on the phone through the hearing person when we would have the funeral. And I said, I can be there as early as 7 o'clock in the morning. And okay. And that was just, like 10 hours difference. Mm-hmm. And so we went. Unfortunately, we normally had a Ghanaian who would drive us there in our vehicle because the roads were so rough. And sometimes they had to take a different homemade road.
Oh, my.
To get there, because this was back in the hills. And needless to say, he couldn't that morning. So my wife and I set out. We drove. We actually ended up going through this rut, and, it caused our tire to blow out. And so we were delayed in getting there, but we finally got there. But they already had put him into the ground. Mm. And I had a student from the seminary with me because I knew we're going to have hearing people who spoke the local language. Mm-hmm. And so he could speak that. He knew English. He could translate for me into the other hearing people. Our elder then translated into Adamarobe Sign Language. I voiced in English for the English-speaking people, and I signed in Ghanaian Sign Language. So the funeral was led with 4 languages by 3 people.
That's beautiful, actually. That's a beautiful story.
Yeah.
Think about that. But that's what it takes to bring. Do we have? You've said this a couple times. So you talk about we have deaf congregations in churches, and I'm certain we're probably not the only ones.
No.
And other than my wife, I don't know, and I say that in jest. She's lost a lot of hearing. She can still certainly hear with the aid of some mechanical devices. But I don't know of anyone who's absolutely deaf. I'm hard of hearing, terribly bad. But
being hard of hearing is one situation.
Yes.
But being either born deaf or developing deafness at an early age.
Yes, that's completely
changes
different.
your world.
Yeah, and I haven't thought about that. But obviously, it's a big population. Yeah. Okay. You've been talking about Africa and all this, and I was curious, you've got experience in both locations, right here and in Africa. Can you think of any misconceptions that Americans might have about the church in Africa or about African culture itself?
Well, yes. Wow, I could probably go on for days about this. But I think in general, a lot of people have the misconception that the church in Africa is still tribal, meaning that
Okay.
their tribe, their location is limited, and so what religion they have is basically a tribal religion. And, I mean, going back through the years, yes, it was. And is tribal religion still an issue today? Yes, but in a different sense. So when Christians went to do mission work in Africa and brought the true gospel there, and as they talked about God and what God does, Africans began to see, oh, well, we can see that, in nature.
Sure.
We can see that, in the world, what you're talking about.
Right.
But through their tribal religious eyes, just like we see the trees change during seasons, the leaves, they change the colors, they fall off the trees, and all of a sudden they come back on the trees. You have to understand that climate is different there, especially where we were. We were in Ghana, where we can grow 2 crops a year.
Wow.
Because the season doesn't really change except from Harmattan season, which is the sands from the Sahara being blown up during the winter months of the northern hemisphere, south, and then falling, in the atmosphere, so bad that it's like a very, very foggy morning, but it's like that 24 hours a day for a period of, 3 to, well, no, it's not 3, it's more like 4 months.
Really?
Yeah, of the year. And then, you have the rainy season, when it comes. And so, you have time to plant, 2 different crops in a year. But they don't experience that. The leaves fall off, but at the same time, leaves are coming on.
Okay. So they don't see the, and I love talking about the 4 seasons, and that's one reason I like living where we live, because I can experience 4 seasons. Sometimes a season is a week or a day or 2, but anyway.
Yeah. Right.
But we do get the seasons.
Right.
Look, we are natures of our environment, right? And if our environment were us living in Africa, born in Africa, living in Africa, we come at things from that, I don't want to say world view, but maybe
from
that
what
perception.
We know.
Yes.
From what we live.
We only know. And I saw this experiment, and I love science, right? I love science. And the scientist was saying we are born with only knowing 2 fears. One is, maybe he said it was only 1 fear, and that is, as a child, the only fear they have is falling. I thought that's interesting. So it seems like globally or universally, there's this fear across the globe of snakes. Mm-hmm. So that means that fear is taught. And he took 4 young toddlers, put them in a room with 4 or 5 large snakes, and I'm assuming they were non-poisonous snakes. He videotaped it. You can look this up on YouTube. And the children don't react at all to the snakes. Matter of fact, they're patting the snakes. One leans over and tries to bite the back of a snake. They had no fear. Mm-hmm. So that is learned. There are so many things in our lives that we learn through our environment. And that happens even in cultural differences. Yep. So it's very important to understand those cultural differences to be able to establish communication and trust and so forth and so on. And so that's what one of the things I'm assuming is one of the challenges as a missionary to Africa that you would have to partake in or.
Well, yes, but not only just to Africa, but also here in the United States, being a missionary or a pastor to the deaf.
Yes.
They live in this same world that we do, where, they wake up to the same time that we do. They walk the same sidewalks. They see the same plants, yada, yada, yada. But yet their world is different because of the way they learn, which is what you were just pointing out, that
Right.
we learn these behaviors, we learn different traits throughout our life in the world. Very, very true. Now, going into a different country like Africa, it's even more emphasized because you're not only going where the language is different, you're not only going where the color of your skin is different, you're going to where they eat foods you've never even heard of. They have daily practices that are different than yours, like getting up at 4:30 in the morning, retiring at night by 9 o'clock, going to bed, at that time, because they're so close to the equator, there's not a lot of difference. They have 12 hours of sun from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m.
Ah, okay.
That creates a cultural difference.
Sure.
And so, when we talk about worldviews, we talk about different cultures, very, very different, very, very difficult, to know. You can read about it in books.
Right. But to experience it.
But to experience it is totally different. It becomes part of your life that you live with.
Right.
And, I remember, when I was doing deaf ministry up in northern Wisconsin, and predominantly deaf ministry, and in northern Wisconsin, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And once a year, my wife and I, thought we need to get the deaf together, because I had 8 preaching stations that where we had deaf from different parts. And so on Father's Day, we would have all of them come to our house in Rib Mountain. And we had about 3/4 of an acre. And so we would set up a tent in our backyard. And we would set up a little stage, kind of makeshift this, and we would have an outdoor picnic. But the most interesting thing was we had, up to 250 of our deaf people.
Wow.
So we had a large crowd. But what was so interesting was the neighbors were so afraid, not of the people, but of the noise that this was going to create in the neighborhood. It was so interesting because the people that were to the back of our property, they sat on their back patios and watched, and came over afterward and said, "I could not believe how quiet these people are." Now, obviously, they're going to be a little louder sometimes, with cups on tables, knives, and things like that.
Sure.
But when they don't use their voices, and it's just signing.
Now, you'd stated earlier, and I was thinking about this, about the number of, first of all, that there is absolutely a difference between people becoming hard of hearing, like moi, or by age or by trade or craft or bad habits, and people either being born without the ability to hear, or because of some sort of a malady, a medical condition, losing their hearing.
Yeah.
Have you met many that have lost their hearing, and do you have to minister to them differently than those who have never had hearing?
I have had, throughout my years in ministry, I've had spouses of individuals who were born deaf or became deaf at an early age in life.
Okay. Yeah.
And, through different experiences in their life, they met a hearing person. Some of these hearing people have lost their hearing through, whatever malady that life, presented itself. And they would wear hearing aids when they would go out. Mm-hmm. But, through time being married to a deaf spouse, they've learned the sign language. They've learned about the deaf world, and have become part of it. And yet, they've still had that foot into the hearing world. Their life is different. And I've had some of those who have come to the church and want to learn about the church. So do I teach them differently? Well, yes. The way I would teach them is in a combination of both the way I teach the deaf
Hmm.
and the way I teach hearing.
Okay.
So I would use a combination of those techniques to teach them because like I said, one foot is in the deaf world, one foot is in the hearing world.
Hmm.
Not necessarily because they were deaf, not necessarily because they were hard of hearing, but because they lived with one foot in it because of their
Correct.
marriage.
That makes sense. Again, because of their environment.
Yes.
So you've I don't want to assume anything here. From our conversations, it sounds like to me, do you spend quite a bit of time at the seminary, Fort Wayne Seminary?
Not anymore,
Not
since
anymore?
I've been
Okay.
retired. I do go periodically, but
Okay. I was just curious from you were a young minister or a young pastor one time, and you've seen the seminary, and you've talked about several vicars that I know through Trinity Lutheran.
uh-huh.
Can you share what qualities do you most hope to see in the next generation of pastors?
Now, when you talk about pastors to like the hearing world or
Sure.
pastors,
Either way.
Okay. Well, I think there are some characteristics that I would say obviously are for both. One to be, convicted and committed to our Lutheran doctrines, and to Scripture. But then there are some where there, let me put it this way. Also, a compassion.
Mm-hmm.
A young pastor today, it's so easy for us to be, and I don't want to say uncompassionate, ill-compassionate, but, I tend to see more and more younger people today who they don't understand compassion because their world is so occupied, well, it is what it is,
Right.
with technology
Right.
and the self. I can go to my office at my house and I can spend the whole day in there.
Mm-hmm.
I can communicate to people around the world through the internet,
Sure.
through texting and then I can spend time by myself reading and studying and writing. And then all of a sudden my wife comes and she sits down. Who are you? Where are you from?
Right.
This is my domain. Well, I just wanted to ask you a question. And all of a sudden now I have to find that compassion in me to listen
Right.
to her.
Right.
Whereas before,
That's intriguing. I know exactly where you're going. That makes sense.
yeah. I mean, years ago, when we didn't have all the computer technology, the phone technology, and we had basic communication, even with the telephone, and the deaf have the what was called the TTY, the teletypewriter.
Yes, right.
They could type, through each other, which was, early age texting, if you will.
Right.
And but that all that technology has developed so fast that it consumes us, and the level of compassion that we carry with us is no longer a compassion that leads me, but it's a compassion. Oh, I got it in a pocket somewhere.
Right.
Let me find my compassion.
Yeah, your phone. Yes.
Or well, not necessarily just my phone, but I do have that ability to be compassionate, but I've got to change my focus.
You got to orient yourself towards
Yes.
it.
Yes. And so we have so much that misdirects us these days, in this world, and in different, and we always have had that since Adam and
Correct,
Eve
correct,
and the
yes.
first fall into sin. But the fact is, we have that same concept, but orientated differently because of different things, and added things into our daily lives, so that we become so self-consumed that when I'm preaching, who am I preaching to?
Right.
Am I preaching to me and you? Or am I preaching to, there's this world outside these walls.
Right.
And I'm really preaching about them. Wait a minute. We all are sinners.
Correct.
None of us is holy. We all need to hear God's law and the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
We need to know that we are sinners. We need to confess that we are sinners. And we need to repent to God. And we need to know for sure that I am forgiven, that you are forgiven. And we hear that through the voice of our pastor.
Mm-hmm.
That's why a commitment of compassion that I would look for in a young man, wanting to go into the ministry. And I have a little young man that's 12 years old that I look at, and I have seen this heart for compassion for a long time in this young man. Happens to be one of my grandsons. And he's got that compassion in his eyes.
Mm-hmm.
He's got it in his voice when he speaks. He's got it in his hand when he shakes hands with you. You just sense this young man has the ability to understand how you feel,
Mm-hmm.
or understand what you need to hear or to see. He's got that special gift. And, we can see that in people. We can sense that in people. And so those are the kind of young men that I think we need to look to today at that age and to help them. We need to lead them. We need to guide them. We need to speak to them. And every time we do have that opportunity, we need to remind them, have you thought about the ministry, becoming a pastor? Let me show you about some of the things that I do. Let me tell you about some of the people that I have met in life. Let me tell you about some of the places where God has led me. We have to build their interest, because the world is definitely building their interest in other areas.
Yeah. You've hit on so many different areas. I don't want to call them triggers. I hate that term, for lack of a better term.
Points of interest.
Well, they're not points of interest. They're points of annoyance with me. And the technology is one of them, even though I am fully immersed in technology due to my vocation, for a lot of reasons, I'm immersed because of this podcast. I'm immersed in technology, right? I really, and I'm not Amish, okay? I'm not trying to say we need to go back I think like Paul talks about, and I know it's about dietary conditions, but it's about balance, right? I truly do believe it's about balance. And when our younger people today, and I have grandchildren the same age as your grandchildren, I get very alarmed in how much their lives are influenced by technology.
Yeah.
And when my kids were young, we were just as guilty as the young parents today. Our children didn't have computers or phones or things that they could do, but we had a VHS tape. So if my wife and I wanted to have a moment, we could put in a tape and make them sit there and we can go have a conversation. It just seems so constant nowadays, and I'm guilty of it. I've doom scrolled things that I am actually following a family of pandas at a zoo in China. I mean, that makes absolutely no sense, but it does bring me a little bit of joy. But regardless, I don't know. I see so many negative things that technology does. As a matter of fact, I was just reading that neuroscientists have discovered across our country, public schools have spent billions of dollars on, nobody has a textbook anymore. They have laptops. And they get all of their education through this laptop, or a portion of their education comes through this laptop. Now, neuroscience is saying actually for the brain and the way it maps, a textbook is better, because at least when you read something, your brain technically maps. Well, I know I read it on the left-hand page, about the middle of the page. When you're scrolling on a screen, there's nothing for your brain to map that to, because it's just a continuous scroll. So some schools are now switching and going back to textbooks. What amazes me is that so many things that we've said were old, that's just old-fashioned, that now science is catching up saying, well, actually, there's value in that. And, and work and a continuous improvement and all that. We talk about, there's two things. There's one called a value add and a non-value add, right? And when we talk about what is value add, a value add is anything a customer is willing to pay us for. Non-value add is anything a customer is not willing to pay us for. So in my industry, when we buy a coil and we roll form it into something else, they're willing to pay us for that. Otherwise, they'd go buy the coil themselves, right? Because we can stamp it, roll form it into something. Now we're changing it, and that's a value add. Mm-hmm. When we pick that roll form piece up and we move it to a welding jig, they're not willing to pay for that movement. It didn't change the product. Once we put all those components into a welding jig and weld them together, they're willing to pay for that. That's value add. When we take that parts that were made components and weld them all together and have a finished part, they don't pay us to move it from the jig to the powder coat paint line, but they'll pay us to powder coat it, to paint it the color they want it. So there's value add and non-value add. That's everything in life. I think in certain instances, technology has value add. But in so many instances, there's non-value add. And so when we start thinking about what we know and what we learn and so there's value add in a lot of things that we were taught young that we've gone away from because that's old-fashioned, that's old school. It's interesting to me how it comes full circle. So that's why I always like to use that analogy when we look at, I talk to people who will say, I don't believe the Bible. It's all a bunch of gibberish. It's all myth. And it's a bunch of stories that aren't true. And it was written over 2,000 years ago, and it doesn't apply to my life in the 21st century. Those are people who have never read the Bible at all, right? And so when you start, and I don't care what you read in the Bible, but if you've read much at all, you can start applying things from much older than 2,000 years ago into our current lives, and they fit. It's a value add. And it's making people recognize that is one of the missions of Crusade With Me, first of all, is there's this godly wisdom in Scripture that applies in the 21st century and beyond. If we can slow down, be quiet long enough, for lack of a better term, and recognize it in the Scripture. Be still and know that I am God.
Yep.
That's that's where we're at, right? You've been at this for a long time. So after decades of ministry, what do you know about Jesus today that you didn't fully understand when you started first in ministry?
Wow.
I know, it's a biggie, right?
What do I know about Jesus today that I didn't know when I started in ministry? I think I would have to say that his graciousness, his forgiving love is when I started in the ministry, I knew, I had grown up with the understanding that we make confession of our sins, we repent, and God forgives us. But I think throughout life, we go through different trials, we go through different testings, we see others, tried and tested, and we see how the world can corrupt so easy. I guess I want to say I grew up in more of a sheltered life.
Sure. Okay.
Where, I didn't see all of that stuff growing up. And so there were a lot of new experience every year of my life that I became familiar with. And I think through those experiences, I could see God's love in Christ greater and greater.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of that love to be able to forgive my sins, no matter how bad, no matter how disgusting, no matter how gross they are to God.
Mm-hmm.
And yet through the blood of his Son, I'm covered with his righteousness. That whole act of Christ making me righteous.
Right.
I understood, but I guess through time, through life, we understand it more because we live it more.
We live it. I think that's right. I think you're right. And one thing that I've always been drawn to the Lutheran Church was because we don't spend a lot of time talking about feelings. Okay. And that's not my strong suit anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. But I hate to say it, for lack of a better term, we've used the phrase, you just used the phrase, we know it. When we truly know, and that's the breaking, changing point in my mind and in my life. When I truly know, Kathy has said repeatedly how much, besides, I have a grandson that he's 13, but for several years he's referred to the sacrament of the altar as the B&B, the body and the blood. Okay, so it's just the B&B. And we've always held on to that,
Yep.
when it's and but when we know, so beyond the B and the B, Kathy said repeatedly her favorite part of worship is confession and absolution.
Yep.
Sorry, pastors. I know you spend a lot of time on your homilies, but but the confession and absolution and the B&B, okay, the body and the blood, just are the highlight. And when you know that, and I mean know it, not I know it like I've got this memorized so I know what I need to say. When you know it internally, and man, that's life-changing when you know it internally. And I don't know how else to describe it other than to know it internally.
Well, I think that's, it's not something that we are born with.
No.
Because by nature we are born sinful and unclean.
Yes.
And yet it's only through the Word,
Mm-hmm.
through the work of the Holy Spirit in that Word and the sacraments, baptism and the Lord's Supper,
Mm-hmm.
that the Spirit creates faith and strengthens faith. And so when you asked me that question, what do I know about Jesus today that I didn't many years ago starting out? I know more about Jesus today because of the Holy Spirit's work in me.
Mm-hmm.
through his word, through his sacrament, not through my preaching. I've learned it by the Spirit's work,
Yes.
that creating and recreating.
And that's the blessing. That's the gift of
Yes.
God.
Yes.
Yes.
And so, I mean, for me, for you, it's the same. How do you know more about Jesus today than you did growing up?
Mm-hmm.
By his grace,
Correct.
by his Spirit, through that word, through those sacraments, we are brought closer. We are given not a clear, but a clearer understanding of the mysteries of God. Because those truly are mysteries. How is it that one man can die for the sins of the whole world?
Right.
How can one man's death make all people of all ages righteous?
Mm-hmm. Well, he conquered death.
Yeah.
He conquered death.
Yep.
I think that's the curse, right? I don't think Adam and Eve in Eden were born to die. I think that they died because of the curse, right?
Well, the curse came, though. How did that curse come? Well, I mean,
right.
Now we get into some other topics.
Right.
The fall of Satan from heaven.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, obviously, that's where it's beginning. Satan falls from heaven. Satan takes, angels with him, fallen angels. So the devil then is cast into the abyss, by God. He's got this special place that's called hell.
Mm-hmm.
And man is created. Man is told what he is to do, what he is not to do. And yet, now man meets Satan.
Correct.
Well, that doesn't sound so bad. Well, and so Eve tries it. Here, Adam, look. And Adam falls for it too.
Right.
And so is that God's plan? I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either.
But God did not make robots.
Right.
God did not create robots like what we see today. I saw some episode on the news not too long ago about these robot people walking in the streets of New York. And what's interesting, they're programmed to do this or that and kind of have relationships with people, and walks up to one kid, does a karate move, and kicks him in the stomach. All right? Well, that wasn't meant to be.
Right.
Even these robots operate uncontrollably.
Mm-hmm.
But as human beings, we do have that free will. Unfortunately, that puts it in a good light. Free will, that sounds great, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's the free will that always gets us into trouble.
Yes, right.
That's what always separates from God. When man takes it upon himself to think, oh, that's not so bad.
Mm-hmm.
But it is. That goes contrary to God's law. It goes contrary to God's gospel.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we can write books on this stuff, and there have been. But the fact of the matter is, but when I put myself in that position to say, well, this is what's really right for me,
right,
and not to rely on what God says is right for me. And he has done that in his word.
Yes.
Just as he spoke to Adam and Eve, in short, do this, don't do this.
Mm-hmm.
Look what I've given you. I've given you all of this world, all of the creatures, all of the plants for you to take care of. You had nothing to worry about. You had food.
Correct.
You had everything you needed in life. But then when we think we know better than God, now all of a sudden, I start needing things.
Well, it's a violation. Oversimplification, in my simple mind, oversimplification is it's the violation of the first commandment. All right. we replace God because we don't trust him because we know better.
Yeah.
I know me because I'm wearing my underwear or whatever. You know what I'm saying? I know me better than God knows me, which is not true.
Right.
That's how many different stories do we hear about the potter and the clay? And the clay doesn't ask the potter what he's doing, right?
Or tell him what to do.
Correct. But we sure do.
Yeah.
We sure do. And that is, so many years removed, finally getting through this noggin, this thick stone noggin of mine.
And so I think, throughout time, we grow in the knowledge of God, we grow in the grace of God, we grow in and through the work of the Holy Spirit, and that faith is strengthened in Christ crucified. Mm-hmm. And so what do I know more today? I know more of that.
Right. Pastor Schumacher, I have absolutely appreciated so much you being here today, and I want to have you back if you would at least agree potentially, and so you can explain to me bondage of the wills, okay? And we could just talk about it. You don't have to do it in sign language or anything, okay? We could just talk about it. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.